My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently?
So, David, this is normally the spot where either you or myself talk about a Dungeon World game we've been in recently. I don't know about you, but I haven't been actually playing Dungeon World in the last month or so. I have had no sessions of Dungeon World. I occasionally take a break from it. And what about you? Do you have any... What's going on with you Dungeon World-wise?
I am right in the middle of a little hiatus while I get ramped up and ready to do the Angle Kite big finale.
That's right. Yeah, because you talked about the mid-season finale already. So, listeners, we were thinking it would be great instead to talk about a Dungeon World game that has gotten played or is currently being played for Comic Strip AP, and not one that David and myself have done. We have a couple of community members, Ollie Jeffrey and Rob Bullen, I think is Rob's last name, right? They have created a comic strip AP. They are producing one called Alford Soultaker. It focuses on this character named Alford Soultaker, who's kind of like a monster hunter guy. And it's still pretty early in the story, so I don't know like all the ins and outs of what that's all going to be about. But it's pretty cool. What do you think of it?
Oh, so good. I'm so jealous because it's like listening to Game of Thrones happen because they each are from another country, so they have an accent.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's such bullshit because they're both British. They have automatically like more fantasy cred or something. You know, like they sound more legit fantasy than you or I do, right? I think it's really good. I like their story a lot so far. They're doing a couple things differently than from when you and I do these short APs. They have like it's slightly more produced in that it has like music and sound effects in the middle, which is something we don't do. And then they also have Rob, who's the player. He does like a little monologue at the beginning of each session to kind of go over like his sort of thinking, just his sort of to kind of present the situation to the listener. And it's pretty cool. It has it feels like just slightly more scripted. I mean, they're still playing, but it has just like a couple of little trappings around it that make it feel just a little more produced than what we do. And I like it. I think it's a good touch.
I love it. I think that it is a natural evolution of the comic strip AP format, and it's one that is more listener friendly. And I think that's a great direction to go with it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I like the variety. I mean, personally, I like that ours is just us playing. I like, because I think when we're doing it, we're trying to tell a story, obviously, and I think we're telling a good story with Domenico and also the ones we do for Ramshackle here on this show. But I do think that to some degree, you and I are a little more interested in like showing Dungeon World, you know, and
right,
like the mechanics and stuff. And so I think our goals are a little different, which is why our show is a little different, or our AP, that is. I like both. I mean, listeners, we have a whole range of comic strip APs covering lots of different games, not just Dungeon World. And each of the teams that puts them together has like kind of their own little take on like what it means to work in this format. And I really dig it. Sort of substantively in terms of like their story, the Alfred Soultaker AP, it is so traditional feeling, isn't it? I mean, it feels so freaking traditional, like, which is really funny because I didn't actually think Ollie was like a fantasy guy, but like I didn't know that about him. I know him well from working with him on Codex. He's our layout guy on Codex. Man, they are telling a traditional as fuck story. Like it feels really OSR. It feels really heavy metal. I mean, the character's called Alford Soultaker. His sword is called Wormblight. I mean, it's
so
that,
good,
right?
It's so good.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I'm not trying to sound disparaging here. I really love it. Like, because I think like the stories that we do for AP and Dungeon World for comic strip AP are a little bit more like cerebral or abstract in some ways, you know, like, and we don't even do dungeon crawls really anymore. Theirs like really has the feeling of like an old kind of dungeon crawl, and I'm really into it. In the last episode, like there was a whole bit where they just talked about like Alfred's gear.
You know? Yeah. Like, I'm so into it. Like that's the kind of, you know, Lord of the Rings style thing that got me into Dungeon World in the first place, and it's been on my mind lately. It's like, man, after I get done with Anglekite, and I think the finale of Anglekite is going to be very dungeon crawly, but I want to just do like that kind of OSR dungeon crawl again. It's been a little while.
I'm fond of that too. I mean, on these recorded APs, we're our story. I think because of the format, we've chosen to do the stories in a certain way. They're a little bit more focused on like character interaction and drama, but in play, I actually do run it like a little more standard, right? Like when I'm running a group through Dungeon World. So anyway, I think the vibe of their story is really good. I'm really into it. Listeners, you can find it on we have a podcast feed called Comic Strip AP, and you can search for that pretty easily in your favorite podcatcher app.
Yep. Or alternatively, if you like the YouTube way of doing things, you can get on there and it will string them one after the other in nice little playlists.
Yeah, the playlists are a really great way of doing them. So, for sure.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For? Jason, this week, I thought that it would be wise, as you have suggested, to let all of our listeners know that we are kind of doing a big blowout on all of our Codex stuff, where we're going to let people get all of them for a short period of time, because we didn't know how awesome Codex was going to be.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. So we made the decision, listeners. We've had a lot of people in recent months and really recent weeks who have been asking, how do I get a hold of the back issues of Codex? Codex is our gaming zine that the Gauntlet produces. And I'm going to be honest with you, we never really had a plan for back issues. I think, like David said, we weren't sure when we launched it how cool it was going to be, I mean, I think we had a good sense of our own abilities, but it has really just become this really cool sort of collaborative, creative space between, RPG writers and fans and artists. Like, it's just super cool. Also, it was originally designed as just a bonus thing for Patreon supporters who are otherwise supporting the wider Gauntlet activities, like our podcasts and things, right? We never really had a plan for back issues.
Right. It's really become its own thing. Like, there are probably people out there who just support us for Codex alone.
Yeah. I suspect there are maybe a few. So, so here's what we're doing. Through May 31st, we've basically made all of the Codex back issues available in the Patreon feed. There's a post in the Patreon feed. It's near the top right now as we record this, where basically the post has links to all of them. You can download them all. There's 8 back issues. Issue 9, which is Codex Madness, will be out on May 1st. And so through May 31st, your pledge will get you all the back issues. It's a super good deal. And I was a little hesitant to do it because on the one hand, there were people who knew about Codex early on, and who, or at least wanted to support us. And so they've kind of helped us get to this point. And we've kind of honored that by, their name is on each issue, right? Like their name is listed there as a backer. So that's really cool. But at the end of the day, we didn't know how awesome it was going to be. A lot of our listeners probably didn't know how awesome it was going to be. A lot of people just who had a sort of loose understanding of what the Gauntlet was probably didn't know. We've had people who just discovered the Gauntlet and they're like, oh, this Codex thing looks really cool. How do I get the old one? So we're just going to, May 31st, it's kind of like a back issue grace period. Make your pledge on Patreon, get all the back issues. We want more people to enjoy them than less. I think that's right?
Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, we want to honor those people who have been there from the beginning. So after May 31st, how you're going to get the back issues, you're either going to have to find someone who has them or
$5 a pop. Probably
going to sell them.
Yeah, we may sell them. I don't know what we're going to do. We're definitely going to compile them at some point into a collection. But but after May 31st, you're just going to get the one that you're entitled to on the month that you pledge. So I think that's the best way of catching everybody up on Codex, because, like I said, in the early days, we just didn't know where this was going.
Yeah, and specifically for Discern Realities listeners, we have put a lot of Dungeon World content into these Codex issues, specifically Codex Blood, Chrome, Ectoplasm, Starlight, Love, Codex Yellow, Codex Iron, and then Codex Madness, which comes out May 1st. All those are going to have just a ton of Dungeon World content.
That's actually all of them except for Dark. As it turns out. Codex Dark, which is the current free issue, is the only one that has no Dungeon World content in it. All the rest of them do. The Dungeon World's a big part of the Gauntlet community, so it gets a lot of love in Codex. Go check it out. I mean, there's tons of adventure starters and compendium classes and magic items and just cool stuff. Loads of original art. So much original art and beautiful layout by Ollie. This is the moment, if you haven't already.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
I think there's a tendency, David, to treat dangers and their associated Grim Portents as very big picture, sort of like campaign or world things. What do you think? Like the Grim Portents in a set of dangers tend to be, like what will the big bad do if left unchecked, right? Like what will happen over here in this corner of the world, right? Particularly for your campaign fronts, right? It's very big picture. But even in the adventure fronts, it tends to be a little zoomed out. Like a lot of the ones I've seen tend to be like, what will happen if you don't complete this adventure, right? Like what's the big arc, right? Like of that's going to impact the world. And that's super cool and super useful. But what I want to talk about is the idea of using the dangers and specifically the Grim Portents countdowns in a more zoomed in way and how that can be a super useful tool as a GM.
Yeah. I think this is a topic ripe for discussion because recently I have brought far off in the distance Grim Portents right up into my player's face, and I think that it is a really effective tool.
It can be, yeah. So I'm thinking of two different things here in terms of this discussion. I'm thinking of your Grim Portents as a way of increasing the tension in the immediate situation, like you're in the dungeon or the adventure that you're really presently in. So tension building device. And then I'm thinking of Grim Portents as a way of recontextualizing adventures or modules from, say, the OSR or more traditional type things, okay? I think those are two ways that you can kind of narrow the scope of your dangers and Grim Portents and get some really good outcomes, right? And so I want to talk about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I see where you're going with this. So let's unpack it a little.
Okay, so the first thing, Grim Portents is a way of increasing the tension in the situation. This, to me, is extremely powerful. I mean, this is extremely powerful, and if you set them up right and if you use them right, you're going to look like a fucking genius GM, okay? So I think by way of example is the best thing to do here. I have an old adventure that I've created called the Temple of the Viridescent Worm, and one of the dangers in the Temple of the Viridescent Worm is a Dracolich called Emerald Nightmare. I think they're called Dragon Bones in Dungeon World, but whatever. It's the same idea. It's a skeletal dragon, right? So the temple is in a swamp, and Emerald Nightmare's bones are in the swamp water and scattered throughout the dungeon, okay? And the idea here is that Emerald Nightmare is gradually reassembling himself as the party explores the dungeon, right? And the Grim Portents, which here are just functioning as a sort of countdown clock, a doom clock, each one of them ramps up the tension, right? So the first one, you hear the rattling of the bones, like in the distance, maybe like in another part of the dungeon, or maybe you're outside the dungeon trying to get in and you hear the rattling on the stone. That's the first Grim Portent. The second one is the party actually sees a large bone skittering across the floor of the temple on its own accord, right? As it moves to the place where Emerald Nightmare is going to be reassembled. I've used this. I've played this adventure several times, and every time that one in particular comes up, like the group just goes, "Oh shit!" Like something is happening, right? You can actually use that one a couple times. Like if you want to repeat that one, I think it's a great thing to do. The next Grim Portent is something is heard outside the temple, rising up outside the swamp water, accompanied by ghostly laughter, right? So at this point, the party knows, oh, whatever, like this thing that we've been either leaving unchecked or not investigating or whatever, this thing that's happening in the background while we are searching this dungeon, it's happening, right? Like it is a thing that's happening. And then finally, the final thing is Emerald Nightmare either calls out the party or encounters the party in some way. He attacks, right? So I love that because those Grim Portents are a tool that I can use as a way of pacing the adventure out, right? It's like as they're searching the dungeon, I can kind of unfurl those things in a way that kind of shows it's basically like, okay, I know they're about a fourth of the way through the dungeon, so this would be a good time to do this one. This would be a good time to do this one, and so forth. And again, it also lets the players know that there is this bigger thing outside of their dungeon crawl that is going to be pressing against them soon, right? So tension building, great way of using a more zoomed in danger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that I want to add in, maybe as a third big bullet point, is using your Grim Portents in a way that has real world implications now for the players, or the players' characters, I suppose.
Give me an example of what you mean.
So the best example I can think of is recently how in Anglekite a certain set of Grim Portents worked. So spoilers if you don't want to know what happens at the Necropolis, the City of the Dead. This is pretty much straight out of the book. The city is leeching the life out of the surrounding countryside in order to power this great magic that's going to help it transport out of this dimension, because all they care about is getting away before the world's destroyed. So they're leeching all this life out, and as soon as the players get to that edge of the countryside where there is life on one half and then just necrotic death on the other, as soon as they cross that to that other side, boom, they're starting to take debilities. And part of that Grim Portents is where that line in the sand is advancing. So that's a real world implication of the Grim Portent. And then additionally, as soon as they reach a certain threshold of power that they have leached out of the countryside, I kind of made this up for my specific game. The city begins to form this green miasmic barrier around it. And some of my players were outside that barrier when it happened, and some of them were inside, and they had to figure out, how do I get out? How do I get through it? And they had to deal with that. And that's not like the final Grim Portent. And then the final Grim Portent is the city is going to transport to another dimension. And all of the players were inside the city when that happened to occur. And they had to figure out what that meant. Are they gone? Can they get back to Anglekite? It was something that we had to figure out.
So it's kind of like the more zoomed out version of a danger in the faces of the players. Like, it's not something happening in the background. Like, it is something happening in the background, but it has like implications for how the players interact with the world right now. I think that's really good. I think that's tricky to do, but I think it's good. I mean, I think at their best, that's what especially if you're doing like a sort of like bigger, more epic style play, I think that's a really effective way of using them.
Yeah, this was a 4-session front. Like it took some major
that's
unpacking.
a bit for an adventure front. That's a lot. No, that's pretty cool. You know, to me, this is like the great power of Dungeon World, right? I say this a lot, but I think that there's something in Dungeon World's ability to push that fiction forward, to put it right in your face, right? And to put it in the hands of the GM to decide when it narratively makes sense, I think is really great. I think it's really key to the success of Dungeon World. It's a big part of it to me. I like that a lot. So this kind of like segues a little bit into what the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which was I run lots of OSR modules, and people ask me all the time, like, well, how do you convert them to Dungeon World? And so this is a little bit of insight into that. The big thing I do is I look at the module and I find out what the big set pieces, the big encounters, the big sort of like overarching like cool things about this module are, and I make them into dangers, right? And I give them a sequence of Grim Portents that build the tension, that do all these things that I like them to do. But importantly, the danger and the Grim Portent like setup, it can help you recontextualize, like working within that framework can help you recontextualize the module, right? So here's my example. One of my favorite modules is a Dungeon Crawl Classics module called the Croaking Fane. And in the Croaking Fane, it has this there's this big idol. It's really huge. It's like a winged frog god idol, right? And the characters see it like almost as soon as they walk into the dungeon. Like it's right there in this temple. And in the module, it has really really specific triggers that cause it to come alive and attack the characters, okay? So they have to step over here on this square. They have to touch this door. They have to do, like it's got these really specific things that cause it to come alive and happen. That doesn't work in Dungeon World, right? Because in Dungeon World, we sometimes don't even have a map, like we don't concern ourselves in Dungeon World with like moving from square to square or moving from like space to space even. Like we keep it, we kind of pull it out a little bit more. We abstract it a little bit more. And so how do you do that in Dungeon World? Like when we don't care about like whether the characters touch this one door or not, right? Dangers, right? Dangers and Grim Portents are how you do it. So here's the one that I wrote for that same danger. The large toadstone eyes, toadstone's like a gem in the setting. The large toadstone eyes of the idol begin to glow yellow. Okay, that can happen whenever, right? Like it's not tied to any specific thing in the dungeon. Just the characters hit a 6, or I feel the need to move the ball forward a little bit, and so boom, the idol's eyes begin to glow. The sound of shifting, grinding stone can be heard. No matter where they're at in the dungeon, the players get the sense, oh shit, there's something moving around. It might be that frog god idol, right? Third thing. The doors of the temple slam shut and magically seal. Well, now it's getting real, right? Like now the characters know this shit's getting down. And then finally, the frog god idol attacks. It's not tied to any specific thing in the module. It's not tied to a specific space. It's not tied to a specific action. But it's the same feeling. It's the same flavor. It's the same outcome, right? You were poking around in this dungeon and this frog god idol came alive. But Dungeon World lets me, as the GM, unfurl that in a way that is dramatically interesting, in a way that that helps build up the tension and helps me pace out the session.
Yeah.
Working within that framework like lets you get all the drama and all the feeling of a module without having to concern yourself with a lot of the details, right?
Yeah, and that's honestly how I prefer to run it.
yeah. And so anyway, I think that's all I had to say. I just want to kind of bring up those two things about dangers and Grim Portents and their effectiveness as like as a tool for the now, like what's happening right now in the adventure.
Well, let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me? Listeners, this week we're going to continue talking about our shrine contest and give one of our shrines that has been submitted some light. And I think this one's a pretty special one, too. Isn't it, Jason?
Yeah, this one is a shrine to the demon maggot godling Melchior by Joshua Fowler. So a little bit of setup here. If you're listening to the Domenico APs, or if you listen to the ones that we did a while back on this show, there was that little maggot demon creature, right? Joshua Fowler actually invented that creature. That was his, in a Dungeon World game that I ran for him, that was his cleric's god, right? And he interacted with it and stuff. It was like a god that was like with him all the time. And so I kind of lifted that wholesale into our AP. Well, he's created a really cool shrine for it. Shall I read the opening text?
Yeah.
The Shrine of Melchior appears as an enormous maggot with a human face straining against a chrysalis. Melchior is a minor godling of secrets and can be appeased with blood sacrifice. A prayer is inscribed into the pedestal at the base of the shrine, reading, "Praise be to Melchior, Lord of that which lies beneath. May he tear the skin from the world and let us bask in the hideous true nature of existence." When the words are read aloud and an animal is ritually sacrificed at the foot of the shrine, the petitioner must whisper a question in the godling's ear and then press their own ear to its lips. For a moment, the petitioner will get an unsettling glimpse into the true nature of the world. Tell the group 2 details that let you know that the world is both vaster and more horrifying than you realized. Then roll plus charisma.
On a 10+, the question will be answered. In addition, for the next full cycle of the moon, when the player rolls Discern Realities, they may also ask this additional question: what is this person's heart's secret? On a 7 to 9, the question will be answered. but for the next week the petitioner will be plagued by nightmares of what they beheld and recover half of the typical amount of hit points from a full rest. Additionally, when you trigger the Make Camp move, each of your companions will tell you a secret, resentment, or petty quarrel they have with you. Take 1 XP per session if you act against them. And then on a 6-, you have pleased Melchior too well. Roll Last Breath. If you fail, you will pass beyond the Black Gate, and your fellow travelers will be none the wiser that your body has become a soulless puppet for the gestating godling.
So that's the shrine. The next part of the contest entry is the spell. It's a cantrip called Foul Feast. It has ongoing duration. When cast, the wizard becomes immune to rotten and befouled food, and will even prefer spoiled food while the spell is active. When a move calls for a ration to be consumed, the character can ignore this as long as they describe in detail what they eat instead. The grislier, the better.
Nice. That's pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah.
And then the magic item is the Ring of the Godling's Favor. This ring is set with the face of Melchior carved in emerald. That's terrifying. The wearer receives the service of the minor demonic aspect of the godling, appearing as a fat maggot the size of a very large toad. It cannot speak, but will obey basic orders, and confers the ability to smell magic and the complete immunity to illusion to its master. The creature has 2 HP, and if destroyed, will reform at the dawn of the next day from the wearer's gullet, causing the wearer D6 plus 1 hit points damage, which ignores armor.
Lovely.
Oh, yeah.
I like it. It's suitably gross in the spirit of Melchior. Yeah, it's super fun. I'm really into it.
Yeah, so listeners, if you want to jump into the contest, we're going to have it running for... How long did we say?
I think through the end of May is what we decided. So.
Through the end of May. And we ask that you keep it under 400 words.
A description of the shrine, a move for the shrine, a spell and a magic item, or alternatively, 2 magic items.
Yes.
And you can submit those to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes. And if you win... you'll win a $50 gift card to either Amazon or DriveThruRPG, your choice, and you'll be invited onto the show to talk about your shrine.
That's right. 2 runners-up will also be invited on the show.
Let's move on to our next segment.
This episode of Discern Realities is being sponsored by Scablands Press. David and I would like to extend our congratulations to Slade from Scablands on his recent Kickstarter for Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers. This was Slade's first Kickstarter project, and he ended with 368 backers, and he hit several stretch goals, including a series of adventure locations by myself and my co-hosts on the Gauntlet podcast, Rich Rogers and Kate Bullock, as well as a setting called The Burial Mounds by Thomas Novosel. If you didn't get a chance to back the Kickstarter for Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers, keep your eyes open for when it becomes generally available. In addition to the stretch goals I mentioned, the book also features art by Dirk Detweiler-Leichte and a layout by Ollie Jeffrey, both of whom I have worked with on the Gauntlet Zine Codex and who are just amazing. So congrats again to Slade, and thanks to Scablands for sponsoring our show.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen.
This is our ongoing comic strip AP featuring the adventures of Ramshackle Crow. And when we last saw Ramshackle and Urbina and Scabs asleep, they were encountering, I guess is the right word, a titanic, and I mean really titanic, being that had tattoos all over its body. These tattoos were displaying scenes from their respective lives between Ramshackle and Urbina, and they were both able to see the Starlight Serpent, like the legit flesh and scale and blood Starlight Serpent, crawling up the beard of this entity and heading towards this entity's mouth. What do you do?
I'm grabbing Urbina's shoulder and backing into that entrance behind us.
Into the little circular room.
Yeah, and just staring at the Starlight Serpent and this massive being who the Starlight Serpent must just seem as like a worm to him, but I'm just kind of waiting to see what he does. If he's just going to let it crawl around, or if he notices it, or anything.
Roll Discern Realities.
All right, so 11. So 3 questions. What is about to happen?
The Starlight Serpent is going to crawl into the being's mouth, and then you and Urbina are going to have to fight it again.
What here is useful or valuable to me?
If you close the door, you might be able to get your bearings and not have to do this.
What should I be on the lookout for?
You should be on the lookout for what is going to happen if you open those other 2 doors in that circular room that you started in. Those other 2 doors have significance. This is just one of them.
All right. I gesture to Urbina and start to move myself to grab Scabs by his arms and haul him into the room. We do not have the wherewithal to handle the Starlight Serpent right now.
Give me a Defy Danger with, I think, Dexterity, just to kind of get this done quickly, get Scabs in there before that snake gets into the creature's mouth.
10.
Nice. Just give me the whole scene.
We're watching this Starlight Serpent making its way towards his mouth, keeping one eye on that and one eye on Scabs. My hand goes over his mouth, my other arm wrenches underneath his shoulder, and Urbina does the same, where she puts her arm around his other arm, and we just start pulling him backwards before he can react and get the thing's attention, and definitely before the Starlight Serpent can complete its traverse into the creature's mouth, which it seems very intent on doing so. And I think that's what signals to me that it's somehow going to have control if that happens.
Yeah. It was almost like, these answers are just coming from instinct or something, right? Like, yeah, do you shut that door?
Yes.
Urbina says, Ramshackle, what does it all mean? What do you think's going on?
I have no idea what it all means, but we can't fight that thing right now. There's no way, especially with that man or god.
Have you ever heard of such a thing either in stories or songs? Do you have any idea what it might be?
And maybe I have.
Maybe you have. You want to roll Spout Lore?
Sure. 7.
That was Father Time. Or that's one of the entity's names that he's known by. Essentially a being that has recorded every moment of your personal history and who can run it back and forth at his will. How do you know that?
It's the tattoos. It's how the story goes in the city of Dis. If you see Father Time, you are going to see your life in his tattoos. And the fact that Urbina told me she saw hers, and the fact that I saw mine, gave so much credence to that story. And that's probably a story you would only hear in the city of Dis.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so even Scabs may have known this story too. How's he reacting to all this?
He's still barely waking up. I mean, I think, like, you got him, you woke him up, you pulled him in. He maybe got a glimpse of what was going on. He just knows that, like, there's trouble. And he's just kind of looking at the two of you. Do you start talking about Father Time?
Yeah, Urbina asked, and I'll answer. When you spend time in a city like this, you start to hear things that, like sailors who come from the ocean, seem unbelievable until you see them for yourself. The tattooed being out there. I've heard tales of the creature before, known most notably where in the world where we came from as Father Time.
And then Urbina says, so I suppose we were being given a second chance.
Perhaps.
a second chance to defeat the snake, which took our mortal lives, a second chance to be back where we were all those years ago. Is that what was going to happen?
The stories vary. Some say that Father Time can't alter the history, he can only have you relive it. Some others say that if you are prepared adequately, you could just change your own past. Who knows?
I wonder where these other doors go.
That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of Gauntlet. We can be found on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. We also have a really terrific community on G+. Just search for the Gauntlet and the community section of G+, and you'll find us. And our Twitter is GauntletRPG.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.